So we've been discussing this concept of pshara krov halodin. We discussed this concept that sometimes dayanim have to enforce a pshara when there's no choice, when it's, as we would say, a zero-sum game, or there's a business that is going to fall apart from the machlokas. There's no way to reconcile the two sides, so we have to mandate a pshara. We're now going to discuss another scenario where there could be a pshara, and that is when, according to Dinei Torah, a shvuah, an oath, is mandated. Now, there are certain circumstances where the defendant, if you will, the respondent, would have to take the oath and not pay the money. And there are certain circumstances where the claimant is obligated to take the oath and then could collect the money. And as we're going to see, there seems to be a reluctance to actually have someone take an oath, even if they are convinced that they are swearing and saying the truth. Because the bottom line is, you're going to use HaKadosh Baruch Hu's name in the utterance of an oath, and that's a very, very serious matter. So let's first start over here. Siman Pei Zayin, Sif Kaf Aleph, and Choshen Mishpah. Let's discuss the conversation on page 22. Ein ma'aymen ela b'shvuas adayonim, she'al tainas vada yukfira, bein shoysa bein min haTorah bein min divrayim. Aval shvuah she'neschayev ba b'tainas sofek bein min haTorah bein min divrayim, v'chein b'shvuas heses ein tzorach iyom. When you're dealing with a shvuah, that's to defend against a definite claim. Reuven says to Shimon, you owe me $100. That's a definite claim. So in that case, the judges do not warn the participants about the seriousness of taking a shvuah chas v'shalom if it's false. I'm sorry, then you warn the litigants about taking it, that it may be false. So what's the story here? Reuven says to Shimon, you owe me $1,000. And it's a tainas vaday, it's a certain claim, it's a certain claim. He's claiming from certainty. In that case, the judges say, listen, Shimon, maybe you should consider paying as opposed to having to take a shvuah that may be false. But if Reuven's taina, his claim, is a doubt, I think, and it's a certain scenario, it's beyond the scope of this conversation to discuss what those scenarios would be, where Shimon would have to take an oath in response. In that case, the judges do not say you should know how serious it is if you take a false oath, because maybe likely Shimon's not taking a false oath. Okay, but then the Mechaber goes on and says like this, in all cases, tzrichim hadayonim liftzor bevale yadinim ulayachzor b'hem ad shlo teisham shvuah klal. The judges should implore the litigants to create a situation where they won't have to take an oath. Let's settle this without having to take an oath. And the Chasam Sofer was asked, what's the big deal? Why can't we take an oath that's emes? Why are we imploring people, please don't take oaths? If the oath is true, what's the problem? So the Chasam Sofer responded, Ne'emanim aleinu divrei Chazal. The words of the rabbis are trusted to us. They really were reluctant to have people take oaths under all circumstances, even if it's a valid and true oath and you're not lying, chas v'shalom. Why? Yiras kavod Hashem. We should have awe of the honor of God, because if we're accustomed to taking oaths, even if they're true, it's going to cause us chas v'shalom to take oaths when they're not true. And there's an achron here, the Evan Yakara, that discusses this too. He discusses, look, in the Rambam, one of the mitzvahs is to swear with truth, because that's mekadesh Hashem, that you are using God's name to verify the emes. And he says, you know something? There's a greater Kiddush Hashem, where someone is fearful of mentioning Hashem's name, that even if he knows what he's saying is true, he's not going to take an oath and mention God's name. And that's an even higher level. That's a greater Kedushas Hashem. It's showing that your regard for God's name is so great, you're not even going to utter it, even when you're certain you're telling the truth. So you're chayav to lose out money because al pi halacha, in order to collect, you're mandated to take an oath. And now you're chayav to lose out money because we say how great a Kiddush Hashem it is not to take an oath. It's a greater Kiddush Hashem to take an oath than the Kiddush Hashem that's created by taking an oath. That's true. So we have a principle, folks. Hidur mitzvah ad shlish. A person is obligated to pay up to a third higher price to glorify the mitzvah. And therefore, if the tovea of the claimant is claiming $900 and he's certain that he's right, and he is right, and Beis it says, no, for you to collect the money al pi halacha, you need to take an oath. Better that he should settle for $600 than take an oath, even if it's a true oath. He has a chance to mekadeh shem shamayim by not taking an oath. Then he shouldn't take an oath. And what's the mitzvah of Kiddush Hashem worth? A third of what he would be chayav to pay, because hidur mitzvah ad shlish. Now, the reality is that this is a minhag. The idea that we deduct a third, or it could be the opposite, I want to point out, right? If Reuven is claiming 1,000, let's do 900, it's simple. If Reuven is claiming $900 for Shimon, and basically said, Shimon, you'll be pater if you take an oath, Shimon should pay a third, which is what? 300. As opposed to having to take an oath. Now, in Seder Adin, a modern sefer about how Beis Din works, we have a problem here. Let's say the judge realizes that the Toveya believes the respondent that he's not chayav the money. But the Toveya is insisting on his claim and demanding that he take an oath, and there's Jewish legal basis for the defendant taking an oath, so that he could force a settlement and at least get a third, because we say you should negotiate up into a third as opposed to taking the oath. Let's try to whittle down the claimant so that he'll settle for less than a third of his claim. And the opposite's true too. If we see that the Tovea's claim is probably true, the claimant's argument is probably true, and the Nitzbah is insisting for the Tovea to collect, he should take an oath because he knows that then the Dayanon will whittle it down up to a third, just allow them to whittle it down less. The Igros Moshe Choshen Mishpat Chelak Aleph, Simon Lamed Beis says, look, it seems to be the practice is that we settle to avoid an oath up to a third. And obviously, depending on if you're the claimant who has to take the oath or the respondent, the third will go in different directions. There's no source for this concept in the Gemara and the Poskim Rishonim. It's not an absolute thing. This needs judicial discernment. Sometimes a person doesn't want to take an oath because we know he's not going to lie using God's name. Then if that's the case, settle even for less than a third, for more than a third, or less than a third, depending on where you are. And sometimes we see that really it is true, the claim. And the Nitzbah is forcing the Tovea, the claimant, to take an oath so he knows he could settle. Then don't keep to this third amount so hard. Okay? Let's discuss one other situation and then we'll end off this subject. Sometimes in life you're chayav b'dinei shamayim and you're pater b'dinei adam. So Beis Din investigates a matter and they see that the obligation of the aggressor, let's say, to the victimized party is only an obligation of grama, of causation, and therefore only chayav b'dinei shamayim. A classical example of this is if I see burglars, I made it classical, burglars coming to your house, and the burglar alarm will prevent them from robbing your house, and I cut the burglar alarm. So I'm obviously chayav damage for damaging your burglary system, your alarm system. But it's only causation in terms of the thieves. And the thieves clean you out. I'm chayav b'dinei shamayim for the thieves cleaning you out. B'dinei adam I'm only chayav because I destroyed your burglar, your alarm system, whatever it would cost to repair it. What happens in that scenario? Of Zalman Nechemia Goldberg on page 27. Zalman Nechemia Goldberg, by the way, was the son-in-law of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach and a massive gadol. He says like this: you have in a case of grama or certain types of damages that we don't collect today. We don't collect those damages today. Beis Din thinks in their hearts how much the person should pay the victim, even though we don't mandate these laws anymore today, so that there will be a mechila. The victim will forgive the aggressor. And they actually could put the mazik into excommunication until he appeases the aggressor. Or let's say you have a case of grama. The whole concept of a pshara is to get mechila from the claimant so that the defendant will not be hurt. B'dinei shamayim. And that is something that we could do in the context of pshara, even if these aren't matters that we would actually judge today, or we can't judge because technically they're only chayav b'dinei shamayim. Okay, we'll stop here. Mitzvah Hashem will continue to do subject on Erev Shabbos. Everybody should have a wonderful day.